So countdown era. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of our Lightning series. So I'm thrilled today to be joined by Ivan Lee from Datasaur, who's CEO of Datasaur. And Ivan actually spoke at ODSC West. We're just talking about this. I would say I can't say a few short weeks ago anymore. It's more like 6 weeks. But Ivan gave a great session there on, if I believe I got the title correct, it was a very distinct title, twice as fast and a third cheaper with model distillation, which we'll talk about more. But before we get into today's interview, I do have a few quick things that the ODSC team have asked me to share with you. And before that, as always, we want to make this interesting and interactive. So when you have a chance, please let us know where you're joining from and what you do, and be ready to share your own questions and comments to this interview. So let's see here what we have in these slides. We have a lot of events coming up. Not going to spend too much on this slide because I want to get into more. It's more near and dear to my heart. So we do have our next conference coming up in May of 2025, and that's going to be ODSC East. It's actually our 10-year anniversary. So we've been doing ODSC actually since 2015, and if you can count, which I know all of you can, that would make it 11 years. But we had a little thing called COVID, so it's our 10th year for in-person conferences. So we're very excited about that. We're moving from the Heinz Convention Center down to the much bigger Boston Convention Center, which is in the Seaport. So if you've never been to Boston, never been to the Seaport district, that's basically a brand new district they've built out in Boston over the last decade, especially the last 5 years. So we're very excited to be down there. I think it's going to be a great space for us. Everything's on the same level, no up and down the stairs. And our super early bird is ending for that. And then for those of you joining us who are new to AI, we just hosted a meetup here in Davis Square in Cambridge last night. I was saying this to a few people. It's never been a better time to be joining AI, because this really is now the era of builders. Before, when we started ODSC and you were a data scientist or a deep learning and machine learning engineer, you were very much focused in the weeds of the models, and model deployment was always kind of a lot of fun. And we'll talk about LLM ops today, but building apps like AI apps from start to finish was a bit of a chore. But now with all these great tools out there, these great data services, these great AI services, like what Ivan has built at Datasaur, make it much more easier. And we're trying something new. We are doing a 4-week-long or a month-long builder summit. So Wednesdays and Thursdays, we're going to be hosting intensive hands-on workshops. We'll also be doing office hours. We'll have guest speakers. We're going to do a demo day. So it's going to be a ton of fun. So go check that out. There's paid passes available for our training instructors. And then there's also free passes as well. So very excited about that. And don't forget to check out, if you're looking for a recording on this, I'm sure there's going to be some great nuggets of information. You'll wish you had written it down. So don't worry. We will convert this into our podcast. So do check out our podcast, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you listen. And tune in. All right. So with that, let's get on with today's session. So Ivan, welcome to our live stream.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And to save myself recording this later, I'm going to say welcome to the podcast as well. So Ivan, we met, was it for the first time at ODSC West? End of October. Or was it East? I'm trying to remember.
My first time attending an ODSC event was East. I briefly shook your hand and then thanked you for the event. It was very well organized.
Oh, now I remember. I briefly shook your hand and thank you for speaking. Yes. So, at the Heinz Convention Center where you spoke is a great venue. but it is an older venue, so we're excited to move to the convention center in Boston, as I said. So, Ivan, just introduce yourself to our audience. Maybe give a little background and perhaps some key moments in your career that got you to this point, running your own startup in a very cool space.
Absolutely. So my name is Ivan. I'm the CEO and founder here at Datasaur.ai. I studied computer science at Stanford, so I come from an engineering background. One of the fun facts of my career is that I studied, my very first AI class was actually under Andrew Ng before he went on to become a global superstar in the industry. I also took computer vision from Dr. Fei Li before she went on to do amazing things. So yeah, very promising starts. I've been building AI in the industry for the last 15 years, most recently building some of the AI solutions over at Apple. And I started Datasaur close to 6 years ago now, specifically to focus on democratizing access to natural language processing, the field of AI dedicated to text, documents, and audio.
Excellent. And I do know if people want to check out your website, Datasaur, there, I have looked in the past on how you can build bounding boxes for NLP and text, and I thought that was very cool. And maybe we'll get into that in a little later. Did you do your undergrad at Stanford? Because I think you dropped out at one point. Was that your master's?
Yes, I did undergrad at Stanford. I started my master's, dropped out. I have 4 classes to finish. My parents really wish I would go back and finish that degree.
Yeah, but look, this field is moving so fast. You got to be in the weeds of it, so to speak, as you are. And then for the fundraising for your startup was quite interesting as well. I believe you raised $8 million from Greg Brockman from OpenAI and some other quite illustrious investors.
Yeah, we're a YC company, Y Combinator, class of 2020. Our demo day was the day that California went into lockdown, so that was very interesting. We're also backed by Initialized Capital. And yes, Greg Brockman, again, before OpenAI was a household name, we were introduced to him and he had faith in what we were building out.
And what was that like when you say on the day of lockdown? Because I remember here in Boston, it was actually Boston. It was the day before St. Patrick's Day when everybody in Boston fills the bars. And the mayor kind of freaked out and says, okay, what's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, for us, you may know, some of you in the audience may know that YC hosts an in-person demo day. It's very famous. You get up there for
big deal. A lot of pressure. How long do you guys prepare for that? Sorry for interrupting, but
we prepare for weeks, right? So we prepare for weeks. It's like 2 minutes on stage, and it's a really, it's like the final exam and the graduating ceremony. And as we got closer and closer, they realized this is a really big deal. And suddenly it became like, okay, you have 30 seconds on stage, and then it's down to like just a slide deck. And then at the very end, it was just one slide. So it was, a very interesting time. A lot was changing, but we were very fortunate to be able to raise our round at the time.
Well, that must have been a fantastic slide, Ivan, because you managed to raise 8 million. I was at a meetup yesterday, and there was another VC there, and they were showing me a slide they saw from what was it, the business model. It was a graph, an XY graph, and then it had a one line going up, and that was it. That was the business model. Basically, we're going to make money. Didn't explain how or anything, but anyway, I'd love to see that slide one day. Maybe I'm sure that's framed on a wall. That was our $8 million. I know it was more than that, but wow, that's some experience. So let's get into today's session, because the title of our live stream for today is 2025. It's around the corner, a few short weeks away. The large language model playbook. So we're going to talk about small language models, model flexibility, deployment and best practice. And to all our listeners, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because it seems very open-ended, but like many of you listening, I'm also trying to use various flavors of open source, closed source. There's a lot of stuff going on. It's changing month to month and certainly week to week. And Ivan, haven't heard you talk a couple of times now. I know you're very much in sync with what's going on. And again, you're running a great startup there. So let's start with, I don't know, I guess the first thing I mentioned there was small language models. So there was a lot of talk about small language models at ODSC West, and I'm sure our audience have been reading a lot about it as well. But it seems like they've become increasingly relevant in AI development projects. even in the era when everything's dominated right now about GPT 4.0 and Llama 3.2, 70 billion. So yeah, small language models living up to the hype.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I would approach this is I feel like when things are changing this rapidly, it's very helpful to look to the past and trends of the past. So yeah, there are phenomenal technological discoveries today, right? If anyone who's paying attention, this month alone, we've seen new proprietary models from Amazon called Amazon Nova. We saw the launch of Gemini 2.0. There's the 12 days of AI from OpenAI, where they're just kind of unwrapping a new announcement every single day. It is an insane pace. And right now, a lot of folks have been asking, what is the best model? There's this idea that there's going to be a winner take all. Everybody's going to consolidate to one model. Or at least a lot of folks were thinking that up until about 3 to 6 months ago, right? In 2023, it would have been unheard of to say that anybody could catch up to OpenAI. It felt like they had such a lead, such a gap between them and second place. But now a lot of these models are interchangeable. In fact, people are using Claude for certain types of things. People are using Gemini for certain types of use cases. Llama and Mistral as open source models are really only half a step behind. So what I'm excited about here is the idea that these large language models will continue to improve. They're going to be fantastic. But at the same time, we don't need, for at least an enterprise, we don't need a single model that does everything. We need more specific models that have been trained to do very specific things. And in that sense, these small language models have been showing a lot of promise. What I mean here is a large language model might be 405 billion parameters for Llama. Rumors are that, OpenAI's models are perhaps even 1 trillion parameters. Small language models can be much, much smaller, 8 billion, 3 billion. I've seen one that was even 500 million. And the idea there is that you can have these small language models that are good at very specific things, and they'll be much more efficient at what enterprises are trying to get them to do.
Yeah, it's amazing that we still don't know the size of that, how big GPT-4 model is. The one I heard was like it's 1.7 billion parameters, or maybe it's a trillion. And it's a mixture of experts model, and very interesting. And I think the 500 million model you talked about is I think it's Quen model from Alibaba. I think it is. Yeah, pretty amazing. Could we talk a little bit about so again we're jumping straight into parameter size, like, but what does that mean in actuality? Like what is the architecture in a small language model that allows it to be small but yet work very well on task specific domains or even more general problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we refer to parameters, and this is oversimplifying by a long shot, but when we're referring to parameters, we're talking about the number of neurons in the model that are firing in order to generate an answer. And the wisdom and the marvel of the technology with ChatGPT's launch was that when you add enough parameters, when you add enough data, suddenly it becomes this it becomes this breakthrough in technology in what it's able to understand. But we're starting to see diminishing returns as we add more parameters, as we add more data. And what we've also realized is, the analogy I use is, I'm a terrible cook, right?
Mm.
But if I could train with a Michelin star chef for a month, I could probably make a darn good omelet. And so that's really what these SLMs are all about. You don't need a Michelin star chef that can make every dish under the sun. You need an omelet cook who's really good at making omelets. And it turns out you can train something with far fewer parameters to make a really good omelet.
Yeah, very cool. I was just looking at one of the leaderboards. I forget which one I was looking at. It wasn't on Hugging Face, actually. I'll add it to the show notes. But looking at these various scores for small language models, and maybe we'll get into evaluation metrics and benchmarks a little later. But I know Pi 3 Mini, which is from Microsoft. I think that's a 4 billion parameter model, was up there. Llama 3.2, 1 billion, which did that come out a couple of weeks ago? I have a hard time keeping up with that. Llama 3.2 1B, as the name suggests, is a 1 billion parameter model. That's insane. Like the definition of what a small parameter model is, and that scored quite highly. Qwen 2.5, the Qwen 2.5 library is also impressive. I think that goes from 0.5 to 70 billion as well. That also had a very powerful, a little slightly lower score. So these are very highly scored. But in terms of real world applications, can you tell us, like, if you're looking at a small language model, how do you decide between a small language model versus a large one? Like, what are the factors you're really prioritizing? So it's obvious that if I want a small language model just to do, I want to run a healthcare app on the phone, and this is a very good healthcare small language model. But what are the factors that really come into play that you've seen with small language models for selecting them?
Yeah. So the key to small language models is actually fine tuning, right? Because if we just use a small language model, it's actually going to perform worse out of the box than ChatGPT 3.5 did, right? Even with all these advances. But what we've learned is that with very specified fine tuning, while throwing kind of like specific examples, you mentioned healthcare. So let's run with a healthcare example, right? Let's say you wanted to understand doctor's notes with a patient. So you've got this medical history. You want to understand all these terminologies, symptoms, drugs, prescriptions, things that you may not have had in the general training data. Now, a small language model, if you just use it out of the box, won't really do well at that. But if you give it, a few thousand examples and kind of start teaching it this terminology, then similar to me learning how to cook an omelet, it will learn to get good at specifically reading doctor's notes. It won't do a great job at summarizing the Barbie movie, but it'll do a really good job at this one particular task.
Very nice. I actually did, I forget if it was the title of a talk or I heard someone say it, but people were saying, fine tuning is dead because of all the hype. Like this year was definitely all about retrieval augmented generation, like RAG. And the advantage of retrieval augmented generation for our listeners is, imagine you had you vectorize all your data, you turn your text and images and whatever into vector embedding spaces. You store that in some kind of a data store, Weave8, Milvus, and whatnot. Then all of a sudden, as your real time data comes in, you can vectorize it. So, do you think fine tuning is dead? I don't think so either. But what's the counter argument?
I think there's a lot of attention grabbing headlines because people just need to get attention right now. But
right.
I see them as very complementary technologies. You can fine tune and then connect to RAG, right? What RAG does is it provides a very specific context and answer with relation to, let's say, this medical history. So coming back to this application, you would fine tune it with a whole bunch of different patients' medical histories so that it can begin understanding all these drug treatments. And then you apply RAG in a real-time context to ask questions about my own or a very specific patient's medical history, right? So a lot of these things, there's this kind of pessimistic outlook right now that GPT-5 is not going to be nearly as big a leap forward as GPT 3.5 to 4 was. And we're going to start getting diminishing returns in foundation models. For me, that's okay. What we had with foundation models was a 10-year leap in technology overnight. We're all still catching up to it from an engineering perspective. So techniques like fine tuning and RAG, these are going to make these technologies so much more powerful and so much more useful, even without the foundation models themselves having to do that much heavy lifting.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Especially from what I fall in the VC community, like maybe we've overinvested, not we, but the venture community maybe overinvested. No, I think now's the time to build. Yeah. Now it's time to build. And I'm actually happy things are slowing down a little bit. And most builders are, because a slightly better model or even a much better model, there's still a lot of low hanging fruit that we have to work on. So I agree wholeheartedly with that.
If I
And
may,
oh yeah,
I would also add that like I started on this kind of looking to history tangent earlier and I didn't quite finish my story. Um, we don't need supercomputers. What we're seeing with
mm,
foundation models is like the development of supercomputers in real time. Yes, they're available via API, but not everyone needs a supercomputer. The PC revolution came about because we made things smaller, we made things portable, and we made them available in every single person's home. Now, similarly with SLMs, it's not just the fact that you can get it intelligent enough. That's not like matching quality isn't in motivation. The motivation is now you can have this technology in the palm of your hand, right? Smartphones, iPhone 16, Apple Intelligence. These are now available as SLMs, 3 billion parameter models on device. We can now have models that don't cost you a fortune. I've talked to companies spending $100,000 a month, $1 million a month with OpenAI. That's insane. It's because they're using a supercomputer to do fairly trivial tasks. So the future, coming back to why I'm so passionate about SLMs, the future isn't SLMs. It's in having Starbucks adopt 1,000 SLMs instead of one super LLM for all the different use cases within their organization.
no, I completely agree with that because when I think it was you had mentioned this or someone else was like looking forward to 2025, like there's so much more to be still done with small language models because it's not just about parameters themselves, but there's some really fascinating model architectures coming out, like this new GPT Neo X design. Mistral is doing some stuff there as well. I know there was some talks around parameter sharing. There's sparse attention mechanisms as well, and I know this is something we used to, if people are familiar with PyTorch, PyTorch is a very good library around quantization. Am I pronouncing that right? Um,
Quantization.
quantization. Sorry, I didn't get it right. Quantization, and those techniques have been around for years. And people, this is what we're talking about. It's moving so fast that we need to time to catch up and apply a lot of these techniques that can make these small language models even more powerful. And yeah, kind of because you went there, Ivan. Let's go there. Open versus closed source models. $1 million is a lot of money to be spent on an open source model, and I don't understand it. I don't get it, and so I'm not gonna rabbit on here because I have my own views on closed versus open source. So let's get into closed versus open source. What that's going to look in 2025 in terms of the LLM landscape and your views on that.
So it's actually quite analogous to closed versus open source solutions of the past, battles of the past, right? The advantage of closed and proprietary models is that oftentimes, it will work better out of the box. You get better support for it. They've productized it. They've made a lot of things very convenient. It plugs into a lot of ecosystems very naturally because they are commercially incentivized to do so, right? So let's just take Azure, for example. They have integrated OpenAI models in such a way that it is very seamless or relatively seamless in the broader Azure ecosystem. So if you're already an Azure player and you have all your data hosted there, if you have all your, you're using a lot of their other services, this is going to be the fastest way to get to production. And for a lot of companies, speed is everything. They need to maintain a leg up on their competitors, right? On the flip side of this, open source is often going to be more affordable because there's no middleman fee, right? So
Right.
long term, open source will be the cheaper option. It can, if the community invests enough in it, then there can be an equally powerful ecosystem built up by the open source community. And I think the key thing for me in 2024 has been observing from a kind of model agnostic perspective. We thought open source would be lagging at least a full generation behind. But Llama just launched Llama 3.3, I think it was last week, right? And so I feel like they are half a step behind at this time. And by 2025, they may be fully caught up in terms of foundation model alone. That's why, as I alluded to earlier, it's not going to be about foundation model capabilities. That layer will actually be commoditized in the next couple of years, I fully believe. It'll be around all these other things that these auxiliary features that we're starting to see pop up. Advanced voice mode. You have OpenAI's, what do they call it? Canvas, right?
Yeah.
You have Anthropic's computer use. You have AWS guardrails, like all these auxiliary features to help enhance and differentiate their models. That's why they're investing so much in these features.
No, it's shocking. I was looking at the again the leaderboards a few days ago, and I do remember this GPT 4.0 and Llama 40B, the latest Llama model, the 40B one, neck and neck in terms of performance. Maybe a GPT 4. No, actually, I think there were absolutely. I think the benchmark I was looking at was the multitask reasoning, MMLU, and I think they were both scoring 88. Definitely OpenAI 01 was better at reasoning. And yeah, so then if you look at human evaluation and coding, they're up and down, but it depends on how you fine tune them. So it's actually all gotten very confusing which one is better, but they are super close in compatibility. And one thing someone again, I had a fountain of information at ODSC West. Someone mentioned this to me and I went and looked it up because we were trying to figure out, well, how much of the market does OpenAI have? And because they release those numbers, how many people are on it, but it's very tricky to measure this because you look at downloads and open source, but by some consensus, and again, please don't quote me in this, even though I'm saying it, but in some consensus, they were saying that closed source models have a 90% market share. And let's even say that's 80%, right? Let's just say that's a nonsense number. Let's say it's 80. That is still doesn't make any sense to me for a number of reasons, which I'm able to get into. But I'm going to ask you the question first. Like, what do you think is holding back organizations using open source models?
Well, Seamus, let's call out that the O in ODSC stands for open. So there's definitely going to be a bias there. But I mean, I'm with you, right? It's actually very simple to me. OpenAI has become a household name. ChatGPT isn't quite a verb, but it's a household name that every person recognizes, right? Claude may be a little less so. But we start talking outside of the technology bubbles, and people may not be quite as familiar with Llama or Mistral, right? So a lot of it so far has just been first to market advantage and the amount of dollars spent on marketing, right? Also, these are consumer technologies. Both Claude and OpenAI and Gemini, for that matter, all have applications on device that allow you to install and start using them as a chatbot. But the trend that I'm seeing is everybody starts with OpenAI by default. If
they do. We did.
This technology, why wouldn't you? It's honestly the right thing to do. But in the last 6 months, we have seen people start to actually go from proof of concept and technology testing into production. And that, the ability to go into production, that raises new types of questions. So one of the talks that I gave this year at ODSC East was around ROI, right? Return on investment. And so now those people spending $100,000, $1 million a month on these proprietary models, is that sustainable? Does that actually get you the ROI you need? What if you could use an open source product that was a quarter of the cost? What if you could distill that into an SLM? And by the way, the 3x cheaper is outdated now. We've gotten it down to 17x cheaper, 17 times cheaper, right? So what if you could suddenly take your bill and go down by 17-fold? So if you're running this in production with 1 million, 10 million API calls a month, suddenly the open source models with their cost and their speed and their configurability are looking a lot more appealing. So it hasn't been a level playing field, but I think in 2025, 2026, we are going to see a much more level playing field as people are considering all the different dimensions of this decision.
Yeah, those are some great points, Ivan. And I will remind our listeners, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat, and then I'll pop it up here. I'm reminded. I guess I never bought IBM myself. I was too young for that era. But people used to say you never get fired for buying IBM. As you said, a household name like that. That pressure exists. If you're in a company, like if you're not using OpenAI, the first question you'll get from your boss is like, "Why are we using OpenAI?"
Yeah.
And it makes sense. And the best advice I ever got was start with the best model, no matter what it costs, for sandboxing and understanding capabilities, and then look at other requirements such as cost, scalability, because we also know like hosting models are not free per se. So apart from cost, what are the other factors to look at when choosing a model? Because again, cost is just one factor. Because I use, like, if you use Hugging Face inference or something like that, you still have to pay for the inference cost of the model, which is the actual cost of putting an open source model on a serverless environment and then getting that model to do something for you. So it's an open model, but it's not free.
Oh yeah.
No free lunches. Yeah.
Absolutely, right. And this is why NVIDIA stock is doing so well. So yeah, to be clear, and there's always been a little bit of this confusion about open source and it being free, but like free to use, not free to deploy and run in production, right?
Right.
So yeah, 100%. I think there is still a cost to setting up, not only in terms of like, yes, you need to set it up on a server that has GPUs, and there is a real per inference cost to running this, which, by the way, is the first time in a generation, perhaps ever, in software that there's a cost, a real world cost to running software, right? But even on top of that, now you need to invest a little more in resources. Now you need infrastructure. Like, there might be a new type of role emerging and trending upwards in the next couple of years, which is AI infrastructure engineer, right? Not just AI engineer, not just infrastructure, but someone who specializes in setting up the infra required to run these LLMs and even SLMs, right? You touched on the fact that GPT-4o might be what was the mixture of experts, right? It could be mixture of efforts. You may need to set up similar things for your own cluster. You might need to say like, hey, we need to set up a cluster for Llama, a cluster for Mistral, a cluster for Claude. And depending on the use case and the query that's coming in, we route to different servers. So these types of things will continue to evolve as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it is tough to keep pace with this because we're building out an LLM stack for a VC investment use case, and we are looking very closely at our costs and figuring out which models. And I think what is it, like, we were using Gemini Flash. I think it's 35 cents for a million tokens. Now you got some offering from Amazon where it's like I think 0.000 something cost per million tokens. It's like it's really hard to figure this out. And actually, I know a bit about this because we just published a blog on benchmarks. Published that yesterday, and what I'm working on this weekend is on leaderboards. So I've been deep in the weeds of leaderboards. So I actually usually do not have a good memory about this stuff, but because I was researching it for a blog, I do. And one of the things I was looking at was the various leaderboards, the many leaderboards around different things. So not just about performance metrics, but also about cost and context windows. But just going back to that point about what's holding people back, I do think the resource intensity is an important one, right? Like how often you're hitting these models and doing that stuff. Because people are like, hey, if it only costs 35 cents or 0.00 whatever, a fraction of a cent per million tokens, what do I care? Because I'm just doing a little chatbot. Yeah. But there's a lot more to it. I think the other one holding back open source is maybe a lack of expertise. I think is an important one. And as you said, the other argument I hear is ease of use. But like, have you ever tried Hugging Face inference there? Like all the cloud providers, even Google, Amazon, they're all making it very, very easy to host open source. And the risk factor, oh, well, it's if we host these models on the cloud, well, look, you're hosting HIPAA compliant and risk compliant software in the cloud. So where when the people you talk to and the clients you talk to, where do you think still the biggest gap is around that?
There's a lot of, it's such a nascent technology that there are so few experts to actually implement this across all the different organizations that are interested in it, right?
Yeah.
So we've also been talking a lot about the technology side of this. I want to take a moment and reflect on the business side of this, right? A a lot of companies have been waiting on the sidelines because they can't send data to OpenAI. They can't send data to Claude. Think about legal firms. Think about healthcare. A lot of compliance and regulation and client confidentiality mean that they can't use this technology. But open source suddenly becomes an interesting avenue for them. So we are actually, our greatest growth in users has been from folks who now are suddenly unlocked because of models like Llama and Mistral, who now can start figuring out how to utilize this, right? But again, there is still a lack of expertise. There's this kind of like shroud of mystery around concepts like fine tuning. People, I think, have gotten comfortable with prompt engineering and RAG. I think like a lot of people in this field have, that's very approachable, but taking the next step to like fine tune and host the fine tune model, there's just an extra level of like, oh, I have to learn a lot to do that. So we've been trying to help educate and share that, hey, you can actually fine tune in this afternoon, right? Like a couple of hours, and you can get considerably better results. You can fine tune to an SLM and immediately save your company like at least 10x in cost. So we're starting to try and like get the word out there that it's not really that mysterious, not really that scary. And like you said, all the cloud providers are making it easier than ever. They're making fine tuning available at the click of a button.
This is what I love about interviewing you, Ivan. You've got a great response here, and I'm going to put you on the spot because I know you're great when I put you on the spot. Because exactly, when we were dealing with fine tuning last year, people were like, "Well, RAG's so much easier. I just get a bunch of documents. I put them into. I take speaking of OpenAI, I take an ADA model. I turned out all that text into embeddings or whatever it is. So give us in the 1 minute pitch of how do you fine tune? Like give us the steps you go through to fine tune.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get this down to 3 easy steps. First, you select a model, right? You figure out which foundation model you want. Second, you give it a bunch of examples. It's a 2-column CSV or Excel file or whatever you want. The first is prompts. The second one is ground truth, which is just a fancy way of saying the correct answers for those prompts. You upload those into one of these cloud platforms or Datasaur.ai, where we leverage those APIs. And then you just click fine tune and it's done. And then you get an API endpoint. It's really not that scary.
So many people are afraid of fine tuning.
Yeah.
And they spend more time trying to search for pre-tuned models than they could actually do themselves on their own data, much more secure. So I know we kind of touched on this before, but because you hit a very good point there about, let's go back to the business case here, because as data scientists, AI engineers, it's all about the end use case, right? So what are the steps you go through to selecting a model? It might be an SML, a small language model. It might be a large language model. It might be for RAG. It might be for agentic AI. It might be for this use case you're just talking like, is it kind of a template that people can kind of fill in for choosing that model? Because there's so much at play there to select the model. And maybe I think we overcomplicate it. So how do we simplify? So I guess, let me rephrase that question. I sometimes overcomplicate selecting the right model or I'm already gone off there. But how do you simplify selecting the right model for the task?
Seamus, I'm going to ask your permission here. Can I screen share real quick?
Sure. Great idea.
And I don't want this to be a pitch for our product, but I think this becomes a visualization of the approach. And I think this is the fastest way to
I love it.
Yeah. So
are you sharing your screen though? Do you have permission to share? Yep. Let me make sure I add it. Add to stage. There we go. How about that?
Okay. You see this. Great. So this is Datasaur.ai. It's available for free. I'm not trying to sell anybody on anything. What we have here are 4 of the most popular foundation models and Nova Pro, which was just announced last week, right? So what we do is whatever you want to evaluate. Seamus has talked a lot about leaderboards and how useful they are. They are great, right? But leaderboards are useful for generic use cases like reasoning tasks at large. If you want to evaluate specific things for your company, what we do is we set up these models, and on the right hand, put in any prompt you want, right? Here I have an example prompt. What's the advantage of an open source versus proprietary LLMs? Very topical for what we've been discussing today. And I go ahead and click run all. And we get in real time the answers from all 5 of these models. So now when you say, how do we select what's best? You have to use a real world example from your own organization. Like what's something that your users would actually be asking. And then you go ahead and look at not only the answers here, but also you get the cost and the speed. Those, I think, are the three
nice.
critical dimensions. So you're not only looking at the answer and like how good the answer is, but you realize, oh, I didn't realize that, Llama 3.1 is actually, there's a couple extra zeros here. It's 20 times cheaper than Claude or OpenAI, right? So that's the kind of the first step in figuring out which models might be better at healthcare or e-commerce or finance or whatever my use case is. Trying this out in real time and getting those answers, that is our first step.
Yeah, I do remember you guys came out with a very, because I was actually, I hate to say this, bit of a confession, but I had a podcast, I think it was at, forget who it was with, but it was around evaluation. And you guys had a 2024 evaluation report, which I thought was quite cool. So there's a lot of evaluation, but yeah, tell us about Datasaur since we're on that topic. Then we'll go back to some more general. Tell us about the startup, the mission, what you're offering now, because I love that you guys are offering all this stuff for free. I've heard great things. So let's get into that a little bit.
Sure. So Datasaur was founded in 2019 to democratize access to natural language processing. I felt like NLP was this very powerful technology and not enough people were talking about it. It was hard to get into. So we wanted to make a platform that made it really easy to get the training data and train the models, the NLP models. Now, 2019 was pre-LLMs, right? So once LLMs came out, for me, this is just another tool in the NLP toolkit. It is just another form of NLP. It's a very powerful one, but just another form, right? There will be use cases. For example, if you want to highlight like entity recognition, if you want to pull PII, private identifying information from a document, you actually probably shouldn't be using an LLM for that because that's overkill. It's using the supercomputer to solve like a calculator problem. You should use a traditional NLP tool. But in other cases, an LLM is the best solution. So more broadly, Datasaur makes it really easy to access, build, and develop these NLP solutions. One of the things, and the one that I'll highlight here today, is the ability to select a model, connect it to a knowledge base. We make that really trivial as well. It's just like dragging and dropping files into a Dropbox or a Google Drive. And suddenly you have your knowledge base, you have your RAG connected. And then you can actually do fine tuning and evaluation all within the platform as well. So we try to do a closed loop. You select the model, you connect your data, you deploy it. You can actually start using this directly as an API endpoint. We're cloud agnostic, so you can deploy to Azure, GCP, or AWS. And then once you're done with all this, you can evaluate the answers and fine tune and get to a better result. That is kind of what we do in a nutshell.
Yeah, that is excellent because that is very much needed because it just wraps up in a nice platform, everything you need to do to get from your data to an actual model. I want to talk about the deployment of those models, but I do know what we've struggled with at the start, and I do know there's platforms like Datasaur out there doing better, what we call sandbox testing, right? Because evaluating these models, or rather, like let's call it an application even, is tricky. So can you walk us through a little bit about how what are best practices for sandbox testing, how people can use this, and then we'll get into some user questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think sandbox testing, this actually, one of the other keywords in this title talk is model portability, right? And we haven't spent as much time on that. But one of the key things about sandbox testing and model portability here is we make it like, I think it's a fool's errand to predict at this point who's going to come out on top. It is every week, those leaderboards are shifting. Every week, there's another new model to test and evaluate. So I think it's prudent not to be committing yourself to any one model. You don't want to like say that you're a Google Gemini shop. You don't want to say that you're an Anthropic shop. You need to be flexible as this battlefield continues to evolve, right? So one of the things is be open-minded, revisit your assumptions, test all of this out and figure out what works best today, but make sure that you build your architecture in a way that is flexible And so you can swap models in and out as time goes on, right? Maybe you start with Gemini 2.0 today, but if Llama 4.0 comes out next year and it's significantly better, you should make it so that you can switch over in a day's time to that new model. And you should also be saving all your fine-tuning data. That CSV I told you about, where you have the prompt and the ground truth, you should be saving all of that. So you can fine-tune Gemini today, but you can fine-tune Llama in the future.
No, that's great insight. And let's, yeah, exactly. Let's dive deeper in that model flexibility. Because that was definitely something I advocated and started doing for most of this year, and even last year was using both. Because look, a lot of data scientists I talk to, they're very big fans of Anthropic and Claude. I struggle with it a little bit. I use Gemini, we use OpenAI, and then using Llama models. And so my initial answer used to be, let's use both. But I did notice that was great for sandboxing and playing around the sandbox. But once we were in production and people were actually using these, we started to notice various issues. So like, let's assume that using both is great and you want to build your model architecture around it to make it flexible. But things like when you switch between different versions of a model, validating the responses, like we used to do unit testing in software engineering, and that's a little more difficult on that. And even with the same version of a model, sometimes there's a policy update or something goes on behind the scenes, and all of a sudden, like, why is that model giving a slightly different answer this time, or not at all? Yeah, so I do agree. Like at this stage, playing with both is a good idea. But can you talk about how we can get around? What are some of the challenges, and how do we get around some of those challenges for that architecting that model flexibility?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do is that we standardize everything to a single API. It's actually the OpenAI API structure, right? Okay. So we abstract the AI model at this API endpoint. You can change whatever you want below that. You can change your knowledge base, your embedding model. You can change the foundation model. You can change your prompt engineering. But to anybody who is talking to that API endpoint, the structure is always going to be the same. So if you have a front-end engineer on your team who's building your company's chatbot, all they have to do is they just call that API endpoint and they're going to get whatever answer it is. It's abstracted away from what's happening underneath the hood, right? So that's one very practical tip. The other thing is, like we have this drag and drop interface where you can just like upload files from your computer. You can upload files from whatever. You can change the embedding model, right? So you can swap out, maybe Google's embedding model is going to work better with Google Gemini. Maybe OpenAI's embedding model will work better with theirs. But you can also experiment with up and coming open source. But again, all of that can be abstracted away. So we care about flexibility across every part of this stack, right? The vector database that you use, the embedding model that you use, the foundation model that you use, because these things will just continue evolving. But at the end of the day, so at the end of the day, the front-end engineer on your team doesn't have to worry about any of that. There is one key thing that you mentioned at the end there, which is model drift, right? Model drift is this idea. This would have been unheard of pre-2021 if an API from a well-known company could change answers from 1 minute to the next. That company would have been under fire, right? Like it's insane that that's allowed. But we're in a world where it is a black box technology. Sometimes even OpenAI themselves don't know why something gives a different answer. Other times, maybe they get sued by authors, journalists. They have to retrain. Maybe they actually think they're improving the model because it works better on benchmarks, but it performs worse on your specific use case. So to that end, one other best practice that I push for is this idea of prompt unit testing. We're familiar with unit testing for software engineers. We always have these unit tests saying, hey, is our product still working in production as expected? But now with prompt unit testing, again, you just run maybe 50, maybe 100 prompts, and you have what the correct answer looks like. And if that changes for any reason, maybe you did some fine tuning, maybe you changed out your RAG, maybe the foundation model itself changed. But if anything changes there, it should notify you. You should be alerted so you know if you need to make immediate changes.
That's very cool. Does any aspect that kind of use AI as a judge or LLM as a judge, or is it
Mhm.
just kind of cached?
Nope, you caught right onto it. So we actually there's a couple of popular frameworks, LangChain's answer correctness, Ragus. These are popular LLM as a judge evaluators to determine the proximity or correctness of the answer of the model's answer relative to the ground truth that you've provided.
Oh, very cool. I'll include that in the show notes for sure. So let's move on to model deployment, which we've touched upon, which was the last part of our conversation. How do you see model deployment evolving for the year ahead?
Well, there's a lot of optimization to be done at the hardware level, at the inferencing level. I was just at AWS reInvent last week, right? So AWS has this specific GPU chip called Inferentia that is specialized for inferencing. There's also a lot of hot companies out there like Together.ai and Fireworks and RC and a few of these that all specialize in taking your model and being able to deliver the model's results as quickly and as cheaply as possible, right? So there's a fierce battle going on out there for what is the best inferencing layer. Again, for me, the key is to be agnostic and to kind of like make this portable so that we can shift even inferencing layers. So you can swap things out under the hood, but that API endpoint has to remain stable and usable.
Excellent. And what's kind of cool as well that I'm thinking about for 2025 is we've been very text focused, even though multimodal models have been all the rage this year. But is there, if you're using a multimodal model, is that's, and assuming multimodal, we're talking about, because again, we had a meetup here in Boston last night, and we were doing a vector search example. We're deploying a model based around searching for products and images, and it was showcasing both images and video, and a really cool use case. Yeah, so when we started thinking about multimodal LLMs, how does that complicate the deployment process?
Here's my hottest take of the day. I think multimodal has its place. I think multimodal is going to be very powerful. And there are certain use cases where having a multimodal model is the only solution and the most effective solution. But on the other hand, I think there's a lot of pure CV problems out there, computer vision problems. I think there's a lot of pure NLP problems. So at the end of the day, do you want a Swiss Army knife that does everything to a reasonably high degree? Or do you want something that is really specialized? So for example, if you're an accounting firm and everything you do, it has to do with spreadsheets. Do you care about multimodal? Maybe for graphs and tables and things like that, it can be helpful. But if you know everything's just spreadsheets of numbers, maybe you want to be choosing the model that only specializes in spreadsheets and numbers.
Yeah, that definitely really is sage advice, and goes back to what we talked about with small language models. I do want to actually ask a question from Robert here, which goes back to our earlier ones here. Is that a game changer for from fine-tuning LLMs into small language models, a game changer for small companies?
Yeah. So we're at that time of year where everybody's making predictions about the year ahead, right? My bold prediction is that it's a game changer for everyone. I think that similar to like how many people do you know use a supercomputer today, right? Might be useful for the CIA and, pharmaceutical companies trying to decode the human genome. So yes, LLMs will continue being useful for very specific, very powerful use cases, complex use cases. But I think I think if we meet up 2 years from now and we look back, the majority of use cases out there will all be SLMs.
Exactly, because it doesn't even matter if you're using a RAG architecture. So let's say you're building a RAG implementation, vector search or something like that. It can make sense to use a small language model there as well. And trying to predict the future is always an interesting gambit, but 2025 is shaping up to be a year of agentic workflows and AI agents. What impact do you see agentic AI having on the LLM landscape?
Mm. So this end of call is going to be spicy because these are my hottest takes. My bold take
Yeah,
here
hot
is
take number two.
agents. Agents is a very good marketing hype term. It's a very
Yeah,
good trendy term. For me, an agent is defined uh, as software that takes action. That action could be sending an email, it could be ordering you a pizza, it could be calling an Uber, right? But really, all that is from an LLM perspective is it's an LLM model that calls an API. That's all it is. That's
right.
super basic engineering. Anybody
Has
can hook
access
up
to
an
tools.
LLM
Yeah,
to an API. It's just for VCs and marketing perspective. And to be clear, Datasaur may release a post on agents as well, but it's just much better to say agent rather than chatbot, right?
yeah,
And I also believe that chatbot is the most primitive form of access to these models that we will have. So yeah, hook it up to an API. But people have been doing this from the very beginning, from the very like 3 months after the launch of ChatGPT, somebody used it to order a pizza, right?
yeah.
Agents have been there from the start. It's just a much nicer
Wait, you
way of
couldn't order a pizza online before? Wait, what?
it's just hooking it up to an API. And
Yeah,
yeah, there's even this notion that like, oh, but agents do so much more. You can like have one model call another model and do these things. That's just chaining multiple LLM calls together. That's also very
right.
powerful, right? But all of this is
Also
not a break.
challenging as well. And then you need new architectures and new
Sure.
understanding
Yeah,
and how to.
we can make it
Yeah,
easier, but
yeah,
that's not science. It's not a scientific breakthrough. It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
engineering.
It's a marketing breakthrough. Is that what you're saying, Ivan?
It's a
It's a
marketing breakthrough first and foremost, and then it's just basic engineering. Like it was inevitable because, of course, we want to have it hooked up to APIs that can do stuff for us, right?
I'll tell
It's just,
yeah.
yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was in San Francisco 3 weeks ago. I had returned for to meet with some folks out there planning for next year, and we went to a restaurant. And next night, and I try not to eavesdrop. But it was a pretty empty restaurant, and I do some venture work myself. And a few tables down, across empty tables, look, and two people have. Imagine this. Picture this: two people having a conversation. One person saying to the other person, dude, we got to mention AI agents in our deck. VCs, it's like, I don't know what they said. It was like sugar to a child or something. We got to sprinkle that in there. And the other person was like, well, we don't do anything with AI agents. It doesn't matter. You just got to put it in there. It's kind of like these kids now who are like putting in white text in their resumes and putting in all the AI buzzwords when they're applying for some kind of non-AI role. But I will say, in its defense, I've loved how it's excited the business community. Because look, I'm a small business owner. I have a medium-sized company, or I'm a single proprietor, and there's all these vertical things I want to do. It's not like we talk in very abstract things, but let's say I'm in the clean tech space. I need to gather research. I need to summarize that research. I need to go to my database, send an email, like chunk. Yeah, you could hire a team to do this and use some AI to summarize it. And one of the little hot demos we had last night was around building presentations with LLMs, and that was cool. Like it's still not quite there yet, but there's so these vertical AI agents, and I don't know if any of our listeners have any comments on this or question around it, but just the fact that you're helping people think about this, because what AI is right now, it's got a lot of people outside of the AI engineers and data science excited about AI, and AI agents is another funny story. I was at a conference last year, around this time last year, and there was a few people talking to a vendor, and they had an AI agent released. I'm like, okay, well, tell me about it. And they couldn't quite articulate what it is or what it does. And then I walked away, and a person started following me, and I'm like, why is this person following me? He's like, you seem to know a lot about agents. And I'm like, so I don't know how you figured that out, because I asked a lot of questions because I don't know a lot about agents. He's like, yeah, I was actually a VP at a financial firm. He's like, I'm very excited about agents. There's all this done stuff, all this toil work we want to do with agents. We're going to replace a lot of this toil work with agents so we can do better work. And I get it. So I do get the excitement. Tried agents myself, struggling with the multi-agent architecture, the information transfer, the information loss, but it'll get better. So any other hot takes for 2025? What's the advice for our audience? let's divide this in two, because you know me, Ivan, I keep asking for more and more and more. It's never enough. Like for the personas who are, let's say, AI engineers, data scientists, what's your advice for them? And what about the people who are really excited about AI, or let's say no code or low code? What's your take on that?
Let's keep this pretty simple, right? So for AI engineers, I think the most important thing is uh, stay open-minded. Right now, so many things are shifting. It doesn't make sense to commit yourself to any one family of models, any one company, right?
Our job description, our title. A lot of people are like, I want to be an LLM engineer. I'm like, data science is still the top thing. Anyway, I interrupted. Sorry,
No, absolutely.
but I
So
see people jump on that LLM engineer role
yeah,
so quickly.
oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think the battle's not over, and there's a ton of money being developed, being poured into this. So still think we're going to see a lot of shifts in the coming year. We really need to focus on what's best for our use case, right? As data scientists, it's easy to get lost in the excitement of all the science and development that's happening. But for example, RLHF was all the rage a year ago, but nobody's
Yeah.
actually using that in production, is what I've learned. Talking to hundreds of people, hundreds of data scientists, I haven't found anybody who's actually used RLHF for a production use case. So we have to differentiate between what is kind of academically interesting versus what is useful for a production setting for our jobs.
No, that's good advice. I think for our applications, we haven't moved beyond the thumbs up, thumbs down for the response, which is more of a real time evaluation metric. And then for the folks who are no code or low code, for our
Mhm.
business listeners, what are you excited about for 2025 and what's coming down the pike in AI?
Yeah, so I'm excited about how the ROI equation is changing, right? The return on investment, because costs are dropping significantly. About halfway through this year, we saw this trend where GPT-4o mini was dropping,
Mm.
all these SLMs. Part of the story that these companies are trying to push with this is, if it was too expensive for you before, if the investment didn't make sense, at 1/10 the cost, at 1/20th the cost, does it make sense? We're all familiar with this concept of Moore's law. And it's like, okay, use cases that don't make sense today may make sense 4 years from now when the cost of chips have dropped that much. Now we're seeing the exact same thing, but it's dropping exponentially quickly, right? So pay
Yeah.
attention to your ROI, pay attention to whatever it is you want to, you're pitching to your organization, your team, your executives, and say, okay, well, this didn't make sense at this cost level, but with 4.0 mini, with Gemini 2.0 and its super huge context windows, reevaluate, does this now make sense to you?
Exactly. The context windows are getting bigger. The
Crazy large.
inference speed is getting faster. The costs are coming down, and there's this new concept I've been pitching called, instead of build versus buy, it's build versus buy versus wait. We've built out some use cases this year that don't actually work, and I've never done this in my career before. We've built out use cases that don't work in the anticipation that when we built out the architecture and we can serve it and we can interact with this use case, but we're waiting until the point in time when the models actually get better, and then we slip that in, and then it'll actually work. So that is a very valid point. And getting back to Datasaur, love the way you described how it's a closed loop system, does like a lot of the essential elements of helping you understand which models to use, helping you get a model into production and then deploy it. But what's your focus for your startup for the year ahead? What are you excited about? What are you guys working on?
I mean, my goal is to be the platform where people can develop LLM models most easily, right? Whether, no matter how technical you are, even if you want a no code platform, this should be actually, I'll share one quick anecdote. We have a customer where teachers, non-technical teachers, are using this to develop their curriculums. They're doing all the prompt engineering. And then the engineers just need that one stable API endpoint. So teachers can swap from Gemini to Nova to to OpenAI on the back end and do all this prompt engineering for whatever delivers the best results for their curriculums. But then the engineer just has to consume it on the other side, right? That for me is like this ideal story of making this accessible to technical and non-technical users alike. So we want to continue evolving and making this really trivial, making fine-tuning feel really accessible and something that like, oh,
Yeah.
let me just press this. By the time I finish getting coffee, it's done and the model's ready for me to use. We want to simplify and demystify LLM development for folks.
Actually, I have an idea which you might not agree with. For that AI Builder Summit we mentioned at the very start, it's running from mid-January to the first week in February. And I know in February we're going to do a demo day.
Mhm.
So this is not going to be like Y Combinator one slide. And I think the demo it's a 15-minute demo because I want people to understand like Datasaur and companies out there like what you guys are doing. It's a huge service. It's not like the old days where it's very expensive, big expensive thing. Like you can get started for free. You can get on this. And I would love you guys could do a 15-minute demo of fine-tuning something, like you said. So I'll have the speaker team invite you, or you or your team, because I know you're super busy, and we've already had 2 talks, a podcast, so we can't ask for too much more. But maybe you or someone in your team can give a demo. And if people want to check out that, what we're going to be doing there, the summit, it's summit.ai is the web URL, summit.ai. And Ivan, so how do people check out your work? So I'll include Datasaur, your website on the show notes. I'll also include, like, you guys have done some pretty good blogs. So people can just sign up, get access to it that way, start playing around. Like, how do we get onto Datasaur and start using it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Name an email.
You can add it to the show notes later, but if you just go to datasaur.ai, there's a button at the top, start for free. I think for the majority of what we've been talking about, you want our product called LLM Labs. So free to start. You can immediately get going. The other thing is feel free to, connect with me on LinkedIn. Ivan Lee, Datasaur should be very easy to find. And I'm happy to answer additional questions. I see a couple more questions here in the comments. I'm happy to take those offline and answer those and even get you set up with LM Labs.
Yeah. I think you have to run, Ivan, I think.
Oh.
Do you have to go, or do you have time? You're okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I know we're a little over time, but why not? If you have time to answer the questions, yeah, I'll just show that one. Vertex AI with Gemini and Sega Pro. That's a tough one. Actually, we were just looking at Vertex last night. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough question.
We're talking about, okay, so Vertex AI, Sage with Nova Pro. This is an excellent question that comes back to just, it really depends. And I wish I could give a more definitive answer. A year ago, the answer was definitive. It was GPT 4.0 for everything, right? Mm. But I'll share some of the advantages here. Vertex AI with Gemini. I'll focus like Vertex AI and SageMaker and all these different things. Like those are interchangeable. They're all kind of advancing at similar levels. The Gemini, the model itself, the advantage there is the enormous context windows, right? Google also has the advantage of owning YouTube. So I found that it's really good at answering kind of like the kind of knowledge you would normally go to YouTube for. So maybe you want to like fix a sink as an example, right? That's something that there's a lot of videos out there on how to do exactly that with specific models. So Gemini is useful for those kinds of things. SageMaker with Nova Pro, we've only recently started playing around with it. We're still finishing our evaluation, wrapping that up this week. But early indicators show that it is cheaper. It's not going to be playing to compete with the largest Claude 3.5 models or the largest GPT 4.0 models, but it is quite efficient as a model, even the Nova Pro model. So it has the benefits of like, if it's good enough and it also happens to be half the cost, then that's an easy decision for you. I think that's kind of the angle where it tries to go for. And then Claude 3.5 is, in some people's minds, the current best model out there, which again is astonishing, right? Given what we've given that OpenAI invented the field only 2 years ago. But we're waiting for GPT-5. We're waiting to see if that launches in 2024. But 3.5 is excellent at logical reasoning, first and foremost. I think that's what a lot of people talk about its specialties at. It's also quite good for coding. It's the only one that offers things like computer use. So there's pros and cons to each one of these models. There is no single silver bullet, and I can say like everybody should start here.
That's an excellent answer, Ivan. I don't think I'd be able to tackle that question myself. I'm actually going to repeat the question for my podcast audience. And it's what are your thoughts on using Vertex AI with Gemini and Sage with Nova Pro or Claude 3.5? And now we'll go on to the last question here, which is also interesting.
Yeah. Are LLMs also crucial for data scientists? 100%. I think this is one of those things where the closest thing that I can parallel in my life is this is like the invention of the internet, right? Like if you just don't know how to use LLMs moving forward, you'll be left behind. Think about people who like were slow to understand the internet, were slow to understand how to use Google. When I was in high school, there was this concept called Google Foo. It was like the idea that you would be really good at knowing exactly what kind of keywords to put into Google, whereas, people's grandparents were still typing in full-on sentences and trying to get an answer that way, all right? So there's this notion that, okay, you can be ahead of the time, ahead of the curve. This is going to be a tool in everyone's pocket moving forward. So I'd say it's crucial not just for data scientists. It's crucial for just about every industry out there.
Yeah, very well said. Okay, Ivan, with that very well said point, we can wrap this, let you get back to your Friday. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And thanks for everyone who joined us and asked great questions. I really enjoyed having you here. We haven't done a live stream in quite a while, so you can tell I'm a little bit rusty. But we'll also be editing this down to a podcast. So thank you, everyone for joining us, and join us for the next one. Ivan, thanks again. We'll chat again. We'll reach out about some of the AI. Thank you.
Take care, all.